We're going to call the meeting to order of the Configuration Committee. It's 5:02. Lisa, are you all set?
Yes.
And ready? You sure?
Yep.
Give you a minute. Okay. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for being here. Jeannie, thank you for being with us, too. We are going to dive right into our agenda. We have a short presentation to start. And I'm just going to, I'm hoping that we have a lot of time for those questions, so I'm just going to jump right into that. And Jeannie is going to facilitate for us today, so I'm going to pass it on to Jeannie and Stephen. And Stephen is going to get started, right?
Yeah, we're going to start with a presentation from Stephen, sharing recommendations. And then we're going to do rounds. That worked really well with the merger study. So we're going to do rounds of questions, surface any questions people have, and then we'll do rounds of any feedback. Go ahead and get started, Stephen.
All right, thank you. So I have, let me get back to my share here. All right. The slideshow that I have here is really just pointing to the parts of the criteria and that handout and that table. So it's not going to be super detailed, but just point us towards some of the components of it so that we can see what's going on. And I just really appreciate the opportunity for administration to kind of bring here's what we recommend. This is what we think a strong program across the district would look like. And we're just going to start off with the kind of purpose and alignment piece of all of this, and that is making sure that we are ensuring equity, consistency, and sustainability in our programming. And our programming is what drives our structural decisions. We've been saying this quite a bit, is that programming drives structure, structure drives budget for us. And then really making sure that we're aligned with the strategic plan priorities of equity of access, student-centered learning, and the sustainability of resources as part of our work here. And so we started off, these are the class size and configurations that that administration really has said, this is what will work best for our kids. And so it follows policy and administrative recommendations. It keeps Act 73 in mind. We'll talk more about that. It has some class size pieces to it. We fall within that with our class sizes. And then we have our optimal class sizes here. Pre-K less than or equal to 20, that's actually regulations. Most of our facilities don't hold 20 kids in the pre-K space, but that's the maximum there. K3, 13 to 20 kids, 4 through 6 is 15 to 25, and 7-12 is 17 to 25. One of the things that we haven't fully articulated before, and we want to just be really clear about, and you'll see it a couple of times in this presentation, is that when we need multi-age groupings because class sizes, individual classes are too small, we really would prefer and recommend that we have a model where it's 1-2 is combined, 3-4 is combined, and 5-6 is combined at the elementary level. And that provides consistent and continuous curriculum for our kids. And so that would be our goal, is to be able to keep those kinds of groupings. You'll see this come back up again, a couple of other recommendations. We also looked at transportation and access. So we put some travel time limits. That these aren't policy, but procedure, as the elementary students would have less than 45 minutes one way on a bus, and middle and high 60 minutes or less one way on a bus. And then a piece that was brought up looking at family travel, and this is a little bit different. It's how far away from a school are you? And so that really is elementary. It's a little bit further if you talk about U32. But 7 miles or 15 minutes, we want a big majority of our families to live within that range, so 80%. And what that really says is those people that live on the very outer edge of the district may be a little further than 7 miles or 15 minutes away, depending on what school they attend. And that's true right now. Some families don't live within 17 miles or 15 minutes of their current school. And so we just want to keep that in mind and know that we couldn't hit 100% with any school even right now. We also, as part of our access, is something that's come up several times before in aftercare, and really having some kind of universal access at the elementary school, and really developing our third space for middle and high. And that universal access is dependent upon enrollment, right? We would have to have enough kids to be able to run a program before or after school. But we think that anywhere that we have the numbers for it, we would want to be running it. This was an area where what is developmentally appropriate? And so when you look at that in the chart, we really want separate pre-K and K. So pre-K runs as its own unit, kindergarten runs as its own unit, and no K-1 multi-grade combinations. Now within the document itself, we lay out some reasoning around that, is that kindergarten should be focused on play-based exploration and foundational skills, while first grade starts to emphasize greater independent structure and academic expectations. That keeps us with those elementary groupings of 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, 6 as well for us. And then the middle school being a 7-8 model right now. Already had some questions about this because we've talked about a 6-8 middle school. There are a lot of factors that go into why we're recommending this right now, and that one of them is Act 73. We don't know what the future holds at this moment in time for that. We also know that if we take the 6th grade and place it in the middle school, we will potentially create 3 schools with less than 100 students in them, which is a cutoff around small schools within the Act 73 legislation. So we want to be careful about that. And there's no lack of research that shows that any of these combinations done properly are good for kids. So we can make an argument that pre-K through 6th grade or 6th through 8th grade, these are all good models. That's why people do them. That's why we do them. And so we just want to make sure that we're not arguing that this is a better model. It's a good model either way that you would go, 6 through 8 or pre-K through 6. We just think at this moment in time, moving the 6th grade could create unintended consequences with other structures at this point. And really what we want is consistency and being able to ensure, and I think the really key thing there is smooth transitions, and making sure that we have a program that does that. Now, should there be a change to the configuration of the district, should there be a desire to change that, the 6-8 model is not a bad model, right? We're not saying that's not appropriate. It's just, given our current situation, this is what we would recommend. Right. The other thing we want to make sure that we highlight is that there's consistent programming access. So for the elementary, that is making sure that we have strong literacy, math, SEL, science, global citizenships, art, music, PE, health, library. So these are the programs that we've consistently talked about. We want to make sure that we maintain those programs at a level that's appropriate for the kids. The middle school, making sure that we have our core academics, access to world languages, arts, PE, and health. And then at the high school, maintaining broad access and flexible pathways for all of our students as we're looking at that. I think that was highlighted a little bit also within the merger study that we saw from Tracy around what are the offerings of the high school. So there's some additional information in that document around what's a robust program. Health, wellness, and equity was another one of our categories, really trying to follow the EQS guidelines while also recognizing that we would like for schools to have full-time school counselors and full-time nurses. It is a part of our sustainability to say that we follow the guidelines and make sure that we have adequate nursing, adequate school counseling for our students. And then making sure that we have equitable pre-K access in each school where enrollment meets our standards, so our class size standards. Special education staffing is another area that's more of an equity issue as well. Reasonable staffing there is 1 special educator for every 70 students at the elementary. That's not 70 students that are identified special ed, that's 70 total students. and that's 1 to 65 students at the secondary level. And then another area that was brought up was compensation and staffing. We want to maintain competitive compensation to attract and retain talent, and we do. We're one of the, we have negotiated well for our teachers, and we also want to aim for full-time roles. This is something we've stressed several times, is that having part-time positions or positions that are shared across schools can be difficult for keeping continuity and making sure that students have all that they need at those schools. And then financial considerations that we need to bring into place. So we can predict some of these. Others, we're still waiting. So Act 73, its impacts. It's a per pupil funding model with small school challenges because schools would have to be designated as small by necessity and small by sparsity. Those are two separate categories that have a ton of overlap for there to be additional funding under Act 73's formula. And this is schools of less than 150 students do face increased financial pressure. We start to see that with our own budgeting, is that the cost per pupil does go up as our schools get a little bit smaller. And then budget implications for transportation and staffing. Those are areas, and we'll talk about that in the board meeting around budgeting. Both of those are up for negotiation. Our transportation contract and staff is also negotiating this year. So those are considerations that we also have to have. And then just a reminder that community and governance, we want community input. We had been asked about the impact on property values and enrollment. So impact on property values, there's nothing that we have that we can predict what will happen with property values, so there's no recommendation we can make around that. We also reached out to town managers, clerks, to see what is the housing starts and how is that maybe affecting things. We do not see any significant housing starts that would change our enrollment projections in the near term. If there's something, 4 or 5 years out, we just don't know what that could be at this point in time. And then we also just have to remember that we're guided by our articles of agreement and our board processes as it comes to the governance structures. And so those are things that we have to keep in mind as we do our work. So the next steps from administration is making sure that we continue the board and community discussion. Act 73 implementation certainly is going to have an effect on all this. Continuing to refine these benchmarks and update the recommendations, that's part of what we're doing here today. And just making sure that we stay aligned with our strategic plan goals and all of that. So I think we have, that's.
We have ample time for questions, and I think we'll start them in a round and just see, if somebody want to start with a question they have for Stephen about these recommendations?
I can start.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. I have a couple of questions and some thoughts, particularly around the decision to not move 6 to U32. I think I understand there's multiple components and it all sort of has a ripple effect, and we don't even know what all of those components are at this time. So my question is, in consideration of Act 73 and the schools being lower than 100 students in their enrollment, how much are we just kicking that can down the road? So is that just next year, or that would be, are we projected to have more than just Doty at lower than 100 in the next 2 years? I know you have that data.
Yeah, so the NASDAQ numbers are linked there. I would say that we have, so Doty is under 100 already.
Right, yep.
Rumney will get close to 100, Calais will get close to 100. They're going to be right on the cusp, so it's going to be really hard to predict on whether or not they will. Berlin, it doesn't show any projected decline in enrollment, but East Montpelier does. But it's not going to drop anywhere. It's not going to get to 100.
Right.
And so removing the 6th grade almost certainly guarantees that Rumney and Calais drop below 100.
Yeah, I think to some extent, we know that change is coming, And if we're also thinking about a lot of what we heard, I understand having the 5-6 model at the elementary school also has its benefits. I also really thought that bringing the 6th grade to U32 was a great idea. And personally, for, seeing my kid at Doty in 5th grade, I think he could be here now. So I'm just wondering if you've thought at all about, can 5th and 6th from some schools come to U32?
So I would say from some, no.
It has
right?
to be all.
We would want a consistent experience
Yeah.
for our kids. We have not modeled it with the 5th grade coming up here. I'm not sure that space, I just don't know.
Okay.
Right? So I don't know if that would work or not. I think one of the important things that I would stress this is what we recommend, and what the board wants to do is the board's decision, right? And this
Yeah.
committee can inform that.
Yeah.
I mean, of course. But I think that it's important at this point in time that if we want those kinds of models, that we really have people asking for that and not me just saying.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why I'm asking, is if it existed, and if then there's some comparative information about, as I know you have the enrollment data projected for all of these schools, so next year, keeping the 6th grade at those schools might keep them above 100, but the following year, things are going to change. So they're going to drop below 100
They could.
eventually.
They're very much on the
Yeah,
borderline,
right.
yes.
So I'll stop. I've taken up enough airspace. Thanks.
We'll go clockwise, Rebecca, so if you have something, if you have a question.
I think this is a little bit of a question, mostly to the committee. I get the privilege of talking to Stephen about this. I think one of the things I hear in the legislation is often small by necessity, small by sort of sparsity. What we aren't hearing yet is small by design. And I'm gonna just note that. And I guess the question is in terms of as we monitor Act 73, really being mindful of where are we kicking the can, or where are we making moves that are proactive to be able to say we are designing school this way, versus we're sort of in that space of, well, we're not totally sure. We're succumbing to that. And so I just want to note that for this committee, that is sort of an unnamed piece of, if the board were to choose to be small by design, I don't know what the ramifications would be.
Can I maybe ask a follow-up to that? Could you give us an example of what that would be? Would that be what we went through with Turtle Island? You fill in part of that and that's small by design, or?
Or it may be that you say that we're going to have a school that is less than 100, but it's grades K through 2, or pre-K through 2.
Okay.
What I would say is that one of the ramifications, I think, and this is what I'm hearing in the early piece of this, is that if you are not labeled small by necessity or small by sparsity, then you just won't receive additional funding. It doesn't mean that you have to close the school. It just means that the additional funding that would go to schools that are small by necessity, small by sparsity, they'll receive additional funds under the funding formula.
Right.
So we would be making decisions for the future funding formula that would not include additional for those schools.
Okay. And that's at the same time when our ability to draw the amount of funds that we want from or ask the community to deliver us the funds that we want to fulfill our budget is also going away in favor of sort of a set amount per.
Right. I can't even right now speculate on how the funding is actually going to look,
Okay.
because things are going to change some.
Sure.
And we already know that there's a problem with the formula when it comes to special education in particular. And so there's still some advocacy on how do we get that funding formula that I think is going to need to take place before we really realize how does it affect us.
What that would look like.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Michaela, do you have a question?
No, I guess I just have a clarifying question because I came in late and so I missed the pre-KK discussion. Was there something different about the current model that you're recommending?
So the recommendation around pre-K is that we have a pre-K program in every school where it's viable, right? So enough students. And then we also want to make sure that that we're not creating combinations like pre-K is one classroom
right.
or K1 is one classroom, so that we can get the developmentally appropriate learning and environments for those kids. That's pretty much like our baseline with all of that.
Okay.
There's going to be a lot more pre-K stuff that comes out in the next couple of meetings, because the pre-K task force has got some pieces. It mirrors what we're talking about here.
Do you have a question?
I just want, again, it's a clarifying question, and do you need any more information from the configuration committee besides this conversation we're going to have right now? Because like we were saying, programming, part of doing this benchmarks is that the programming is going to drive small by design, however we want to structure ourselves, so that we can have agreement among the committee, so that then you guys can be creative, right? And so is there anything else that after you did this exercise that you thought, hey, it'll be good, we're missing this?
No, I don't think so at this
Okay.
point in time. I think for administration's purposes, like the next thing, one of the next things we can do is identify where we don't meet these recommendations, because we don't meet these in all of our schools right now. And so being able to show that, and through the budget process, like this committee needs to be, I need this committee to have a voice as to what do we want to see? How do we want to see this? Do we want to strive to hit every one of these benchmarks? And if so, what latitude do we have to be able to do that? And that's going to be a board decision. Do we look at closing schools? Do we just move? Do we change the configuration of our schools in terms of their grade levels to meet these? There's a lot of different ways we can go about it. I think having more direction from this committee and from the board will be helpful.
So just for my own clarification, so that we are all in agreement, because I got to do a little bit of the planning with you, but before the meeting, right? So not that I have privy to more stuff, but I just want to make sure that this table is what we want for kids.
This is
The
what we
benchmark,
want.
This is what we want for kids. In
Absolutely.
order to have equity, in order to bring, these are the opportunity, and this table doesn't include extra opportunities, that's probably going to be a question, but this is the
This is
benchmark
the
of what we
benchmark.
want for kids.
Right.
So we can't, we're not asking this committee to pick and choose which ones you want or not want. We're asking you to be creative on how to deliver this, right?
We want this to be the baseline for all of our kids.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure that we were, thank you.
I think to have this as a benchmark, the multi-age classrooms in particular, I think we would need some big clarification on how that is a pro. I've said this a few times, but I've taught this a lot in small schools in Vermont, and the reality is we have grade level standards for a reason. It is very, very difficult to teach both of those at the same time to a group of kids who are in two separate grades. So I'll just use iReady for an example because we use that here. Third grade iReady, fourth grade iReady, two completely separate curriculums, two sets of materials, two presentations. It takes a pretty skilled teacher, right, to be able to teach with one group while the other group is doing something, switch them out, have them. Sometimes maybe you get like an interventionist who's available to come in and do that, but that's really several times a day, right? We have to do that for ELA, we have to do that for foundations. And then you also need a pretty skilled set of teachers to do things like loop science and social studies mindfully and make sure everyone is getting all the things every other year. So this to me is a huge drawback, continuing to have this by choice. Sometimes it happens and it is what it is and teachers make the best of it, but to intentionally do this, I struggle to see the positives of that choice. I don't think it should be on our sixth graders to keep schools open. I don't think that's their responsibility. If it's a choice we make, it's a choice we make, but that's not their job. And if it's not, these things get harder, right, as we get closer. Like, we want our sixth graders to be proficient in mathematics to come and do great stuff at U32 when they receive half of the instructional time as some other sixth graders. Especially if we merge with other districts, because this is not happening in Montpelier, for example. that's going to put our students at a real disadvantage, and I struggle with that. I also just noted,
Is there going to be a question? Because we're going to do a feedback round.
yeah, well, the question is, how do we sort of justify that, I think, rather than just assuming it's a pro. I'm not sure that it is. My other question is about the staffing piece. Right now, at Berlin, for example, the music teacher is working at 3 schools. I'm so impressed with his ability to run instrument lessons for children at 3 different schools who are in 5th and 6th grade. But how realistically will we change, I guess, from doing that, since that has been the case for a while, to maintain status quo rather than move those kids in to a site where we already have that? What would be the plan for making that a reality? Sorry for all the words, Jeannie.
No, that's okay. I just wanted to make sure there was a question.
So I think the first part, which was more of a statement than a question, but still has a question in it, is that we would prefer straight grade levels. Where we find ourselves having to do a mixed grade level, we don't want to end up in a situation where we're doing a 1-2 classroom one year and then a 2-3 classroom. And then, so if our position as administration, we would prefer straight grade levels. And where it's not possible, whatever configuration we're in, where it's not possible, we also don't want to be anything other than these grade levels. Because as you say, training teachers to be able to do that, I don't want a teacher that has worked really hard to figure out how to do 1-2, the next year have to do 2-3. Because and kids lose. In that scenario, kids automatically lose part of their curriculum. It will never show back up. So we want to make sure that if we have to go to that situation, that's the only way we want to do it. So that's kind of what I kind of want to stress, that just so that because I think your point is really well made on that, is that we don't want to be doing mixed grade is if we don't have to, but when we do, we only want to do it this way. And so then the other part of that is around staffing. The more students that we have in a school, the easier it is for us to have full-time people that aren't shared.
Right.
And so, I mean, the optimal program would be for us to have a little more than 200 kids in our schools. And we can accommodate that in some of our buildings, not in others.
Yeah.
Yep. We also don't forget Anna.
Oh. Yeah. First of all, thank you. I love how it's set out with the criteria. I really appreciate that. I think I also had some questions on, and maybe these are then comments, but like, are these stuck in place? And this, I think, is what you're alluding to. Like, is this set in stone, or do we have the ability to change these? I think there are some parts of this, like and that was a really good answer. I understand where you're coming from. So like that question on the multi-graded classrooms, I think we've had a lot of conversations on the nurse and counselor, and this is sort of setting the baseline at the level where we are now and sits with EQS, but is not where our communities have said that we want nurses and counselors. And I think that, gets back to the trade-off of, we want the small school more than we want the counselor, but I don't know if we want this in the criteria or if we want everybody should have access to a full-time counselor at a school to be our criteria. Because we did hear that a lot 2 budget cycles ago. Sorry, it's not really a question, I guess.
But actually, there is a little bit of a question in the
Okay.
staffing piece, and I think that it's important to note is that our staff across the district don't have substantially similar experiences depending on what school they're at and what they do. So if you had a full-time nurse at a school with 100 and a
Right.
full-time nurse at a school with 500, there's a substantial difference in the workload that they have.
Sure.
And we have that same situation happening with some of our kindergarten classes right now. So we have a kindergarten class of 23. That's actually above when we're having to address those issues, but we have another kindergarten class of 7. And so those are substantially different experiences for those teachers, and not necessarily to the benefit of the kids.
Right, and for the kids.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think maybe it's still not a question, I'm so sorry. I think like we should revisit some of these things and think, is this the right thing? And maybe it's not, there should be one counselor in every school, but maybe we lower that number to say, you know, it should still be equitable, but we should make sure that there's enough counseling and nursing services at the, you know, where there are fewer kids. I think my actual question is the next steps. I don't quite understand what the next steps are. So I read yours, but is it that we take these criteria and then the configuration committee like plays around with numbers and configurations and sees how we meet these criteria? Or do you come back with different models that would meet these criteria and then we look at trade-offs? Or I'll stop talking.
Well, no, I mean, I think that's a decision that the committee and the board needs to make.
Okay.
About what's next. I think what we're talking about right here is refining some of these benchmarks a little bit so that we have a little more clarity, and making sure those recommendations are what our community wants, right? This is administration's recommendations. We know that there's some tweaking around things like nursing or school counseling, but those are all part of the sustainability conversation as well. You know, like, are these long-term sustainable for our system,
Okay.
right? Did that answer, sort of
I
answer?
think next steps will come later.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
But Keely, I heard you say, are these firm, are these set in stone? And I think I heard Stephen just answer, no, this committee and the board can adjust, can make recommendations that are different than these. Am I right about that?
So, yes, however, I would also say that, you know, this is built upon our years of experience with what works for kids and what works for kids in our area. I would just say that I don't think we're looking for wholesale removal of any of these pieces. That wouldn't be appropriate from the administration's standpoint. But saying that, are there some tweaks to this? Are there some priorities that we might give to some of this? I think that that's important for us.
Yeah, we're giving feedback today, but I see your hand up, and Anna has to go, so I'm gonna let Anna go, and then we'll dive into next steps, and then you're next, Chris. Is that okay? Because Anna has to leave.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm gonna let her do questions and feedback at the same time. Go ahead, Anna.
I've just been listening. I don't really have any direct questions at this moment. Thank
Do
you.
you have any feedback you would like to give?
I just feel like it's kind of potentially a different direction than we've been talking about even over the summer. So I'm just processing and thinking about it. I will get back to everybody with thoughts when I have a little bit more time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Chris, are you ready do you have a question?
I do. And a couple of them. In terms of the 7 miles for 15 minutes goal, would that involve erasing town borders potentially for some students who would be closer to a school, and just having basically a reassignment based on that criteria as opposed to geography?
It could. I mean, I think
it
that that's a decision that the board would make around the geographical piece. I think a good example actually is Middlesex, is that those folks who live in Middlesex that's all the way down by the interstate are actually a little bit
Closer to
further
Berlin.
away.
Yeah,
But
okay.
they could very well be closer to Berlin.
Right.
Right.
Same thing like the Doty Middlesex folks.
Yeah.
But no, they're both probably 7 miles,
Yeah.
but different travel patterns. The other thing is there a way to identify when you talk about, is this a baseline that's a gold standard? Or is this a baseline that's a bronze standard? Or something else in terms of what you would want for our students? And then to follow up on that is there any way to get a document that identifies what we are already doing, and then it identifies the other things that we are not doing and needs to be valued in some way in terms of cost value?
I think I'd need a little more clarification on what do you mean by what we are doing, what we're not doing?
Yeah, so you set out a number of different hopes, or a structure of education for all of our students, and you say, this is something you think each of our students should have access to, right?
Yes.
Okay, so what in there do they already have access to in the amount that you're proposing? And, because that would then identify what the deficit is.
Right. So,
And how to address that.
so can I restate that? So
Sure.
really is where do we meet what we're putting forth and where do we not
Yeah,
at this point in time? And then in answer to whether this is a bronze, silver, or gold, I would say that this is probably somewhere in the bronze-ish to silver-ish range. It is not the gold standard. I mean, that would be us having a whole lot more staffing in some areas like library and nursing and all of those kinds of things.
Okay,
But we also recognize the sustainability of that is not there.
that's right, right, okay. So is it possible to do that, to tweak the document so that we know where the deficits are in terms of what you hope, this plan for going forward?
If that's what the committee wants,
Okay.
then yeah, that would be a good.
There's a couple of comments because we don't have much time and clarification, so I'm going to go, Becca, Keely, you had your hand up too, or no? No, okay, so Becca and then Michaela.
So I think
with
what I'm
each.
hearing is that at some point, when we've sort of settled on these, that what's helpful is what might be helpful is if, let's say, for example, mixed age classrooms was listed as a priority, there's a domino to then what school design looks like. So it might allow things like a full-time music teacher if staffing was at a different level in classroom. What I mean to say is it sounds like it might be helpful to put some of those pieces together in different ways, right? What do we raise up as a priority here? It's going to domino to other things. It is likely that all of these things are not going to live in a design of perfection. And so as we kind of think about design, I wonder, one is what are the priorities? And two, how do you move those pieces around so that we can give you back some what does this look like in a reality of if this happens, then this happens, then this happens? Is that sort of what next steps? Okay, I just wanted to clarify because I wasn't totally sure
you.
when, who's doing that. I'm imagining puzzle pieces, but I just wanted to check in. Keely and I can play around with them.
That's how our minds work.
Yeah. Thanks.
We don't have much more time, but I want to make space for any other feedback, and I think Michaelan had something or a question.
I do have a question if there's time for it.
Go for it.
Which is, and I apologize because I got thrown onto this committee newly, and so I don't know what discussions have already been had, but I'm curious about the firmness with which you said, well, administration would definitely prefer straight grade levels. You seem to suggest that is definitely the more evidence-based, better option than multi-grade classrooms. And that's, having not delved into the data myself, I don't know. So I'm just curious because I know we have heard from people in the past about the benefits of having multi-grade classrooms. And my curiosity is just if it's quite clear that one is substantially better, for lack of a better term, than the other, then that just potentially changes what I would want to see in options for configuration going forward.
So I think one of the most difficult things in this whole process is that you can go find research that shows everything that we've talked about and everything we haven't talked about is good for kids. There is research somewhere that shows that. I think that Shannon's point is really good about helping our educators also be able to teach in a way that is the most positive, has the most positive effect on kids. we talk about our curriculum, and that's what Shannon was alluding to, is our math curriculum is written by grade level. Our literacy curriculum is written by grade level. So when you start combining those grades, you're subtracting from each one of those in some way in order to make it work for the kids that are in front of you. Now, that doesn't mean that their experience is bad. It just means that there may be gaps that happen here and there, and those gaps sometimes depend upon the teacher being able to just remember or be trained to be able to do those, and making sure that they don't fall into that. It also creates some staffing issues when you have to split up a class. Sometimes our classes are split so that an interventionist takes one group and the teacher takes another. We really want our teachers to be the experts with those kids and not send off one group while they're teaching the other. And we want our teachers to be able to just meet those needs in the classroom as much as possible. And then, as we talk about additional layers of intervention, that's where your interventionist comes in, not in that initial instructional layer. Right?
So a couple of things. One is also instructional time and making sure that instructional time is equal across the district, and that's incredibly important. I mean, you see scores change, right? When students are not getting equal instructional time, you see a variance in math scores, in EL scores. So the other point that I think Shannon made that was important to, and I want to just rise back up, is as we think about Act 73 and merging, our students, even if we just potentially merge with Montpelier that does not have mixed grade, our sixth graders are going to be walking into a situation where they maybe are not as prepared as those sixth graders. I'm not arguing for one or the other. I just think these are important things to highlight and to think about. So if my sixth grader has gotten less instructional time in mathematics, and a sixth grader from Montpelier has gotten more, they're going to walk into a classroom and be in different places.
Thank you all for your,
Sorry, is that a question that you can answer? Like, do mixed grades have less instructional time than straight grades?
Yes.
Yes.
I just wanted that answered like super clearly, because I think that that's something that a lot of people argue for, and I don't know that that's like a direct answer that we've given people.
So you have to imagine two grade levels in the same classroom.
Yeah,
Their
I get
instructional time in their grade level is half of what a straight grade level would be. That doesn't mean that there are ways to loop things like science and social studies so that kids are getting all of the same content over that time period, but that only works well when you're not changing the grade level configurations that kids are in. You have to have a set pattern
Okay.
to it.
And that doesn't work for math and, like, that would work for something that you could loop, but you can't loop math because you need to teach third grade math in third grade and fourth
Correct.
grade math in fourth grade
And it's same with literacy.
and literacy. Okay.
The practical application is you're training kids to go work by themselves for 30 minutes or more while you teach another group of kids. So if they have a question, they can ask a friend or use a Chromebook.
And this is an existing inequity in our district, though, right? Like, this isn't hypothetical. Don't we have some schools with straight grade levels and some with mixed?
Yeah.
Yes.
So already,
And it-
seventh graders are getting 232 with different
Yeah.
amounts of instructional time in these.
It's not even just the schools, like it's different grade levels, different years. I have a kid who's in a large cohort, so he tends to have straight grade levels, but my other child always was in a multi-age. It depends on class size and things like that.
Okay, go ahead, Becca, and then we do need to move and,
I think it's worth clarifying. I think the undergirding thing is that there's consistency. So whether it's a choice to go to mixed age groups or a choice to go to straight age groups, being consistent year over year is important. It helps stabilize curriculum, it still helps stabilize experience, it helps stabilize what students know, it helps work across district. So regardless of where you, like what research you draw on, I think most research will say consistency in school design is going to be the thing that actually helps to make a difference, and that's what we don't always experience right now.
Right, and you could solve the multi-age with additional staff, right, if you were being intentional in that way.
we want to make sure we have time for public comment.
Yeah,
So
and
I'm
for
going to
the-
turn
and
it
for-
over to you for an update on the configuration timeline.
yeah, and for and the next steps too, because we do need to move, so the timeline is sort of going to highlight that, but I didn't want to I wanted to finish at least this conversation with, it sounds like if we look at that class size and classroom configuration, we're all agreeing the consistency is important. So with that, I'm struggling right now with finding the time because we don't have a lot of more time for us to go back and forth with this criteria table. So I'm going to share my screen so that you guys can see where we should be, sort of with my multiple windows open.
I'll also just say while you're pulling that up, that the labeling it as a bronze level and not a gold level, I think changes a lot of my need to change. I think I saw the aftercare in there for everybody and I was like, ooh, are we shooting for the stars? And I think that that's wonderful that that is in there, but it does, anyway, that's a little.
So if you see we've been talking about this, if you see the timeline here where we wanted to be, we're hoping to be showing configuration models with rationale in October 2025, which is literally our next meeting. So I think we discussed this and we should because it's easier, I believe, but I also don't want to send the administrators in an experiment that then gets not cleared by us, the configuration committee. And I think for us, we would need to see a couple of models that show. So, I'm looking at you, Stephen. So if we're going to look at configuration model with rationale, I'm not more than 2 models that sort of shows us the options using this table as we have the criteria, because that would be easier to have a conversation with community too. It would be easier for the board to understand. So I'm just looking, I know that our time is limited, but we also need to move ahead with this in order, because it would be moving at the same time as we're doing budgeting too, so both things would align. Feedback from the committee, and especially from you, Stephen, because I don't.
Well, so I would just remind everyone that various models have been brought forward in the past that have been voted down. So I think that there's a need to say, we can bring you something that says this might be as close to gold as we can get with this kind of model. But I just want to be clear that bringing models, it's a tricky business, right, for us.
Yeah, and I think we are going to take a risk, right? That's why we're here. We want the best for our kids. We're going to risk it. We're asking you to be creative. This is what we have right now. We don't, I know the kids don't have a year to lose. That we need to continue to move forward in behalf of our kids. So I think that, I don't know, I kind of refuse to not be hopeful. And I know, because believe me, I can, as you know, we can tell stories. But I think if the configuration committee would at least do thumbs up, because I don't want to send them up and say, and not have agreement from you guys that we should move ahead with models.
Yeah, definitely.
Could I just have
Definitely
yes?
models.
Yeah.
Yes, okay. So let's move ahead with models. Okay, so then that puts us back on time. So that's it, and then I can move to public comment. Is that okay? Any questions? Good? Okay. Public comment. I'm not in that window, so I don't see anybody. If you have a question, please raise your hand.
Or can you stop sharing?
Oh, sorry. That's why can't I see anybody? I see why now. Sorry. There. Any questions? I don't see any hands, and we just have board members in the audience. I'm sure they will have questions later on, but there's 9 minutes, so if you guys have questions, by all means. No? Okay. Yeah. Okay. They were also doing their thumbs up, Stephen. I sort of, no, just kidding. Okay, wow. So that's all we had for the meeting today. If there's any other questions that come up, please email us. Anything else, Jeannie, that we should be thinking?
Can I just say, if questions come up as as you ponder this, you're driving home, you're waking up early in the morning, whatever that is, please send them to me, right, so that I can start to incorporate that into the work. It's okay to send, I was having this thought to me. It would be helpful.
So last thing, since we have a couple of minutes, we usually do an update for the board, and I always try to have 3 bullet points from you guys. I took way too many notes, and Jeannie took more notes, but I was thinking consistency of curriculum, the consistency on that part. I'll think better writing. I have a long programming consistency, and so on that part of it, and then share that we had the table, that they can look at the table. Consistency was important for us, and then that we have asked to move into presenting some models at the next meeting, and then when are we meeting next? Is that seem okay? All right.
Here, I captured this.
Consistency, oh, there. Okay, so with that, we're going to adjourn by consensus.